The gavel fell with a finality that echoed not just through the sterile, wood-paneled confines of the Los Angeles County courtroom, but through the very fabric of the Forrester and Logan families, irrevocably altering the destiny of every life it touched. The pronouncement from the bench, 30 years in a state penitentiary, with no possibility of parole before 20, landed not as mere words, but as a seismic event, a cataclysm that shattered the carefully constructed facades of power, loyalty, and love that had defined the world of the bold and the beautiful for so long. The sentencing of Luna Nozawa, the gentle, wide-eyed young woman who had arrived in Los Angeles with dreams of fashion and family, to a 3-decade-long prison term for the murder of Tom Starr is not just a plot point. It is the culmination of a tragic symphony of errors, a devastating character study, and a narrative pivot of such magnitude that its repercussions will be felt for years to come. This verdict is more than a legal outcome. It is the grim, unforgiving punchline to a joke that stopped being funny the moment a life was extinguished, a stark reminder that in the high-stakes game of love and ambition played in the sun-drenched hills of California, there are no true winners, only survivors grappling with the wreckage. To fully comprehend the gravity of this sentence, one must first retrace the labyrinthine path that led Luna from the design offices of Forrester Creations to a defendant's table, her future evaporating with each tick of the judicial clock. Luna's introduction to the canvas was one of innocence and new beginnings. She was the daughter of Lee Finnegan, a woman of immense pride and stringent principles, and the niece of Dr. John Finn Finnegan, a man whose own life had been a roller coaster of familial discovery. Luna came to LA seeking connection and a career, her talent as a designer immediately catching the eye of R.J. Forrester, with whom she sparked a tender, hopeful romance. She was the fresh face, the symbol of a potential future unburdened by the ancient grudges and repetitive scandals that often plagued the show's core families. Her vulnerability was her charm, but it also became her fatal flaw, making her susceptible to the machinations of those with sharper edges and darker intentions. The catalyst for the entire tragedy was, of course, the ill-fated romantic cabin getaway with R.J. It was supposed to be a milestone of intimacy, a celebration of their love. Instead, it became a nightmare born of a simple, yet catastrophic, mistake. Anxious and desperate to overcome her own inhibitions, Luna, unbeknownst to her, ingested not her prescribed anti-anxiety medication, but a handful of powerfully potent, illegally manufactured ecstasy tablets that belonged to her aunt, Poppy Nozawa. These were no ordinary party drugs. They were a volatile, unregulated chemical cocktail designed to lower inhibitions and heighten sensation to an extreme degree. The Luna who emerged from that pharmacological haze was a version of herself she neither recognized nor could control, disinhibited, impulsive, and utterly detached from her moral compass. In this altered state, her path crossed with Tom Starr, the lecherous and opportunistic intern whose own lack of scruples was a ticking time bomb waiting for a match. The confrontation between Luna and Tom was a clash of two corrupted realities. Tom, likely emboldened by his own sense of entitlement and perhaps his own indulgences, saw in the disoriented Luna an easy target for his advances. He was aggressive, persistent, and morally bankrupt. Luna, operating on a base-level fight-or-flight instinct warped by the powerful stimulant in her system, perceived his advances not just as unwanted, but as an existential threat. The precise moment of the push, the shove that sent Tom stumbling backward, his head striking the sharp, unyielding corner of a marble console with a sickening crack, was filmed in the show's signature slow-motion style, emphasizing the irreversible finality of the act. It was not a premeditated murder. It was a chaotic, drug-fueled accident. But in the eyes of the law, particularly under the relentless prosecution of a district attorney eager to make an example of a case involving the city's glitterati, the line between manslaughter and murder became dangerously blurred. The subsequent cover-up, orchestrated not by Luna in her panicked, post-come-down clarity, but by the adults who were supposed to protect her, was the second, and perhaps more damning, catastrophic error. Poppy, upon discovering what her niece had done, and, more terrifyingly, realizing her own culpability in providing the accessible drugs, sprang into action not to seek help, but to conceal the truth. She was aided and abetted by Lee, whose instinct to protect her daughter from scandal and prison overrode her every professional and ethical oath as a medical doctor. In that moment, Lee did not see a corpse that required reporting. She saw a threat to her family's standing and her daughter's future. Together, Poppy and Lee became partners in a macabre dance, moving Tom's body, fabricating a narrative, and scrubbing the scene clean of evidence. They treated a human life as a messy inconvenience, a problem to be disposed of rather than a tragedy to be accounted for. Their actions transformed a tragic accident into a sinister conspiracy, layering obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence onto the original charge of homicide. The trial itself was a spectacle, a media frenzy that held Los Angeles captive. The prosecution, led by a ruthlessly ambitious attorney, painted Luna as a spoiled, reckless social climber whose drug use led directly to a man's death. They presented the cover-up as evidence of a cold, calculating heart, arguing that her family's wealth and connections were being used to shield her from accountability. They portrayed Tom Star not as the flawed individual he was, but as a hardworking, aspiring young man whose life was brutally cut short by the carelessness of the privileged. It was a narrative that, while simplistic, was devastatingly effective for a jury looking for a clear villain. The defense, in turn, fought valiantly to frame the event as it truly was, a perfect storm of pharmaceutical misadventure and self-defense. They emphasized Luna's previously spotless character, her genuine terror, and the mitigating factor of the drugs she never intended to take. They argued for manslaughter, for a sentence that acknowledged the lack of malicious intent. But the case's turning point was, ironically, the moment the truth about the cover-up began to unravel. Bill Spencer, ever the puppet master with his finger on the pulse of every scandal, had grown suspicious. His own complicated history with Poppy, combined with his insatiable appetite for leverage, led him to initiate a private investigation. Using his resources, he managed to unearth a piece of evidence the police had missed, a discreet security camera from a neighboring business that had captured Poppy and Lee's vehicle in the vicinity of the crime scene at the exact time of the body disposal. This footage, presented dramatically in court, shattered the defense's credibility. It directly contradicted Lee and Poppy's alibis and exposed the elaborate web of lies they had spun. The prosecution seized on this, arguing that if Luna was truly an innocent victim of circumstance, why did her mother and aunt feel the need to engage in such a desperate, criminal conspiracy? The cover-up became proof of guilt in the jury's mind, fatally poisoning any chance for leniency. The day of the sentencing was a masterclass in television drama, a scene steeped in unbearable tension and profound sorrow. The courtroom was packed. On one side sat the Forrestos and Logans, Eric, frail but resolute, Donna, weeping quietly, Brooke, her face a mask of shared agony, and Ridge, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on his son. RJ was a portrait of devastation, his world crumbling around him. He had lost the woman he loved not to a breakup, but to the unforgiving machinery of the state. His belief in Luna's essential goodness was unwavering, but it was a helpless, hopeless faith in the face of overwhelming legal force. Opposite them sat a stoic Lee and a shattered Poppy. Lee's professional composure had completely dissolved. The woman who always had an answer, a diagnosis, a solution, was now utterly broken, realizing that her attempts to protect her child had ultimately engineered her destruction. Poppy was a ghost of her former self, the vibrant, sometimes flighty woman reduced to a husk of guilt and regret. Her secret, the true nature of the mints, had been the spark that ignited this inferno. Then there was Luna herself. Dressed in a simple, somber outfit, she seemed to have aged a decade since her arrest. The light in her eyes, once so full of wonder and ambition, had been extinguished, replaced by a hollow acceptance. When the judge gave her the opportunity to speak before sentencing, her voice was a fragile whisper, yet it carried through the silent room. She did not plead for mercy or make excuses. Instead, she directed her words to the family of Tom Star, offering a raw, unfiltered apology for the irreversible pain she had caused. She accepted full responsibility for her actions that night, for taking a substance that was not prescribed to her, for the altercation that led to Tom's death. It was a moment of stunning grace under pressure, a final glimpse of the good person she was at her core, forever overshadowed by one terrible, drug-fueled night. But she also made a heartbreaking distinction, one that landed like a dagger in the hearts of her mother and aunt. "I accept the consequences for my actions," she said, her voice breaking. "But I will never, ever forgive those who, in trying to save me, ensured my destruction. The truth was my only chance. You took that from me." It was a public repudiation of Lee and Poppy, a life sentence of estrangement handed down even before the judge spoke his piece. And then came the moment. The judge, a stern, seasoned jurist known for his no-nonsense approach, methodically laid out his reasoning. He acknowledged Luna's lack of criminal history and her expression of remorse. But he hammered home the prosecution's key points: the reckless ingestion of illegal drugs, the direct causal link between that recklessness and a death, and most damningly, the egregious, calculated, and prolonged conspiracy to obstruct justice that followed. "This court cannot and will not treat the death of Thomas Starr as a simple accident," he intoned. "The defendant's initial actions set this tragedy in motion, but the subsequent cover-up, in which she was a passive yet complicit beneficiary, speaks to a fundamental disregard for the rule of law. It is the duty of this court to deliver a sentence that reflects the gravity of the crime, that provides a measure of justice for the victim's family, and that serves as a stark deterrent to others." And with that, he delivered the crushing blow. 30 years. The gasps in the courtroom were instantaneous. Lee let out a guttural wail that was quickly stifled by her own hand. Poppy slumped forward, sobbing uncontrollably. RJ stared ahead, unseeing, as if his soul had vacated his body. Luna simply closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, as the bailiffs moved in to handcuff her and lead her away, not to a holding cell, but to the beginning of the rest of her life behind bars. The fallout from this sentence is a narrative goldmine that will fuel the bold and the beautiful for the foreseeable future, creating new alliances, destroying old ones, and forcing every character to confront their own morality. The most immediate and poignant casualty is the love story between RJ and Luna. This was not a couple torn apart by infidelity or a simple misunderstanding. They were shattered by an external, irreversible judicial decree. RJ's journey moving forward will be one of anger, grief, and a potentially obsessive quest for an appeal or a retrial. He will blame his family for not doing enough. He will blame Lee and Poppy for their fatal intervention, and he will likely blame himself for not being there to protect Luna that night. This trauma could harden the once idealistic RJ, pushing him into darker, more cynical territory, perhaps even aligning him with a character like Bill Spencer in a desperate bid to find a legal loophole. His relationship with his parents, particularly with Brooke, who will advocate for him to move on for his own sake, will be strained to its breaking point. The sisterhood between Lee and Poppy is annihilated. What was once a complex but ultimately loving relationship is now a battlefield of resentment and blame. Lee will forever hold Poppy responsible for bringing the drugs into their lives, for being the corrupting influence that led to her daughter's downfall. Poppy, in turn, will fire back that Lee's arrogant, controlling plan to cover up the crime is what sealed Luna's fate. They are tied together by shared guilt, but divided by mutual hatred. Their scenes will be explosive, filled with vitriol and heartbreaking recriminations. Furthermore, Lee's career is likely in ruins. The revelation of her role in the cover-up will trigger investigations by the medical board, almost certainly leading to the loss of her medical license. The proud Dr. Lee Finnegan will be left with no career, no daughter, and a relationship with her sister that is beyond repair. Finn and Steffy, who have been peripheral to this drama but are central to the show's future, will be deeply affected. Finn is caught between his mother and his aunt, two women he loves who have committed a monstrous act. His sense of justice as a healer will conflict with his familial loyalty. How can he reconcile the mother who raised him with the woman who helped dispose of a body? Steffy, always a pragmatist, will likely be the voice of harsh reality, urging Finn to protect himself and their family from the fallout, potentially creating a new rift in one of the show's most stable marriages. And then there is the specter of Bill Spencer. Bill, who played a key role in exposing the truth, now holds immense power. He knows the full extent of what Lee and Poppy did. Will he use this knowledge as blackmail? Will he offer a twisted form of support, leveraging their desperation for his own gain? Bill thrives on chaos, and the sentencing of Luna has created a vortex of chaos that he is perfectly positioned to exploit. His involvement guarantees that this story is far from over. The legal battle may be lost, but the political and personal wars are just beginning. In the end, the 30-year sentence for Luna Nozawa is more than just a spoiler. It is a landmark event for the bold and the beautiful. It represents a rare foray into a consequence that cannot be undone by a last-minute revelation or a corporate takeover. It is a tragedy in the classical sense, a fundamentally good person brought low by a fatal flaw. In this case, a moment of reckless vulnerability and the well-intentioned but disastrous actions of those around her. The show has often been criticized for its cyclical storytelling, but this sentence is a linear, permanent mark on its canvas. Luna's journey from aspiring designer to inmate #B73109 is a dark, sobering tale about the cost of lies, the futility of trying to outrun the truth, and the harsh reality that sometimes there are no second chances. As the prison gates clang shut, they don't just lock Luna away. They close a chapter on innocence for the entire show, ushering in an era defined by the long, dark shadow of a 30-year sentence. The courtroom was silent, deadly silent, as the judge's gavel struck for the final time, and the sound echoed like thunder through the hearts of everyone present. The bold and the beautiful reached a shattering climax this week as Luna Nozawa, once the bright and innocent young woman who had captivated R.J. Forrester's heart, stood trembling before the court as her fate was sealed. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her lips quivering as the words she dreaded most fell from the judge's mouth. Luna Nozawa, you are hereby sentenced to 30 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. The gasps that erupted from the gallery were deafening. Lee covered her mouth, collapsing into Finn's arms as he tried to steady her, his own eyes glassy with disbelief. Across the aisle, RJ sat frozen, unable to breathe, his world collapsing in slow motion as he whispered her name under his breath. Luna. This was the moment months in the making, the culmination of betrayal, tragedy, and secrets that had spiraled completely out of control. The young woman who once dreamed of designing couture for Forrester Creations was now shackled and condemned, her life forever altered. The charges were severe: second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering, all tied to the shocking deaths of Tom Starr and Hollis Wexler. The courtroom had witnessed weeks of testimony, emotional outbursts, and shocking evidence, but nothing prepared the Forrester family for the final verdict. It was a sentence that ripped apart relationships, shattered trust, and reignited old rivalries, particularly between Lee and Poppy, whose long-hidden past finally came to light in the ugliest way imaginable. As Luna stood there, her body trembling, she turned to face her mother. Poppy, red-eyed and broken, reached out desperately, whispering, No, please, she didn't mean to, she didn't. But it was too late. The bailiff moved forward, placing cold metal cuffs around Luna's wrists. The click of those cuffs felt like the end of everything. Luna turned her gaze toward RJ, the man who had once promised to protect her from the world. Please don't forget me, she whispered, her voice fragile and haunting. RJ's heart shattered. He wanted to run to her, to scream that this was wrong, that she wasn't capable of murder. But his legs refused to move. His mind was trapped in the echo of her confession, the night she tearfully admitted that she was there when Tom died, that she had tried to cover it up out of fear and confusion. That single mistake, one terrible night of panic, had now cost her everything. The bold and the beautiful has always thrived on dramatic twists, but this storyline hit harder than anyone expected. Fans watched as Luna's once sweet persona unraveled under the weight of guilt and manipulation. The show took viewers deep into her psyche, the trauma of growing up under Lee's strict expectations, the confusion of learning about her real paternity, and the crushing pressure of living up to the Forrester name. When she first arrived in Los Angeles, Luna was filled with hope and ambition. She had dreams of following in the footsteps of the legendary Forrester designers, but instead, her journey became a descent into darkness. Her entanglement with Hollis and the mysterious reappearance of Tom led her into a spiral that ended in tragedy, a spiral that even Lee, the ever-righteous doctor, could not prevent. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Reporters swarmed the scene, shouting questions about Luna's sentence, about Lee's reaction, and about Forrester Creations' response to the scandal. "How will the Forresters recover from this?" one reporter shouted. "Was justice really served?" another demanded. Brooke Logan stood by Ridge's side, visibly shaken, whispering to him, "This is too much, Ridge. That girl didn't deserve 30 years. Something's not right." Ridge nodded grimly, his jaw tight. He knew what Brooke meant. There were still unanswered questions, loose ends that didn't make sense. The blood evidence, the missing phone records, and the mysterious DNA sample that had vanished from the lab all hinted that Luna might not be as guilty as the world believed. Meanwhile, Finn confronted his mother, Lee, outside the courthouse steps. His voice shook with anger and heartbreak. "You did this," he said through clenched teeth. "You couldn't let go of control. You pushed her so hard, and now look what's happened." Lee turned on him, her face pale but defiant. "Don't you dare blame me, Finn. I tried to save her. I tried to protect her from herself, from the truth." Her words only deepened the mystery. What truth was she talking about? The whispers in the courtroom and the murmurs among the family suggested that Lee was still hiding something, something that could change everything. Later that evening, at Forrester Creations, tension filled the air like static electricity. The entire Forrester family gathered in the main office, the weight of the scandal heavy on their faces. Eric sat solemnly in his chair, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the press statement in front of him. 30 years, he muttered. For a girl who just wanted to belong. His eyes glistened with sadness as Donna placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Across the room, Steffi paced like a storm. "We can't let the media destroy us over this," she said sharply. "Luna worked here, yes, but she's not a Forrester. We have to distance the company from this mess." Her words drew immediate backlash from Hope, who stood by the window, her eyes filled with tears. "Don't talk about her like that, Steffi. Luna made mistakes, but she's still human. She's suffering." RJ, silent until now, suddenly slammed his hand on the table. "You're all acting like she's already dead," he shouted. "She's not a monster. She didn't mean for any of this to happen." His outburst silenced the room. Ridge stepped forward, trying to calm his son, but RJ's pain was too raw. "I loved her, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "And I still do." His confession stunned everyone. Brooke's eyes softened with compassion, but Steffi rolled hers, muttering under her breath, "Love doesn't change the facts." But deep down, even Steffi knew that the case didn't sit right. Something about the timeline, about the evidence, felt off. Meanwhile, in prison, Luna sat alone in her cold, gray cell. The echoes of the courtroom still rang in her ears. The gasps, the verdict, her mother's sobs. She held a small picture in her hands, a photo of her and RJ smiling on the beach, back when life felt perfect.